Bansu.
They told you to stay humble. They told you to wait for your turn. They convinced you that thinking highly of yourself was arrogance. And while you listened, while you followed their rules and kept yourself small, someone else walked in, claimed your seat at the table, and never looked back. That is the price of living by borrowed belief systems. That is what obedience to other people's comfort zones does to a man's destiny. Welcome to Machiavellian Mind. I am not here to motivate you. Motivation is for people who need to feel good before they take action. I am here to rewire the way you see yourself, because the way you think about yourself right now, at this very moment, is either your greatest weapon or the invisible prison you have lived inside your entire life. Most men move through this world apologizing for their existence, making themselves smaller, hesitating, waiting for permission that is never going to come. Machiavelli understood what the weak never want to admit. The world does not respond to who you are. It responds to who you believe you are. And today, that belief changes. Drop a comment right now and type the words, "I move in silence," and let my results speak. Number 2, the identity shift. Here is the first truth no one is brave enough to tell you. You are not behind. You are not broken. You are not too late. You have simply been operating under a false identity. One that was carefully installed in you by people who were afraid, consciously or unconsciously, of what you would become if you ever truly saw yourself with clarity. Your parents, your teachers, your environment, your childhood friends, who called your ambition pride. They did not always lie to you with malice. Most of them lied to you with love.
Yeah.
But understand this without sentiment and without exception. A comfortable lie, no matter how warmly it was delivered, is still a cage. And a cage is a cage whether it is made of iron or of good intentions. Machiavelli wrote that a man must be willing to see the world as it is, not as he wishes it to be. Now apply that same ruthless clarity inward. Stop seeing yourself as the man who needs things to go right. Start seeing yourself as the man who makes things go right. That single shift in self-perception is not arrogance. It is not ego. It is the fundamental psychological rewiring that separates the powerful from the permanent spectators of life.
The
The spectators are always watching, always commenting, always waiting for the right moment that never arrives. The powerful man does not wait for the room to validate him. He walks in and becomes the standard by which the room is measured. And here is what makes this so dangerous for the people around you.
Banitin.
When you change how you see yourself at the deepest level, you stop being manageable. You stop being predictable. You stop being the man they could count on to shrink when pressure was applied. The world has a system for keeping men in place, and that system depends entirely on you believing you are less than what you are.
Tatters.
The moment you stop believing that the entire system loses its grip, think of yourself as the architect, never the raw material. Decide your own dimensions because the world cannot place you where it wants you. If you have already decided with unshakable certainty exactly where you belong. Number 3, the psychology of self-perception. Let us talk about what dark psychology has always understood, what the manipulators, the power brokers, the people who move quietly at the top of every room have always known, and what they hope every single day that you never discover. Self-perception is not merely confidence. It is not simply a mindset. It is a signal, a transmitter, a frequency that your entire being broadcasts into every room you enter, every negotiation you take part in, every conversation you have, and every person who dares to look you directly in the eye. People do not read your RSUM first. They do not begin with your credentials, your background, your accomplishments, or your intentions. They read you first, and within just a few seconds, they decide whether you are someone to be leveraged or someone to be respected. That silent decision, never spoken aloud, determines how every interaction with that person will unfold from that moment onward. Here is what makes this even darker. The men who are exploited most often are not always the weakest men in the room. They are the men with genuine ability, real intelligence, and real potential who simply never learned how to project a self-image that matches what they are truly capable of. They undervalue themselves during salary negotiations. They over-explain themselves in rooms where silence would have served them better. They laugh nervously when they should be sitting still. They ask for permission when they should be making decisions. And the predators in the room, the ones who have studied human behavior with cold precision, they spot this immediately. They do not see a humble man. They see an opportunity. Machiavelli understood that perception is not a vanity. It is a survival tool. The prince who is perceived as strong even before he has proven his strength commands a different reality than the prince who waits for proof to precede his power. You must understand this about yourself. How you see yourself is how you present yourself. How you present yourself is how the world processes you. And how the world processes you determines every door that opens and every door that stays permanently shut. Drop a comment right now and type the words, "I am the signal, not the noise," because that is exactly what you are becoming. Number 4, the cold truth about power. Now we go deeper, and this is where most people will feel uncomfortable, because what I am about to tell you cuts directly against everything the modern world has been conditioning you to believe. Power is not given. It is never granted by committee. Never handed down by institutions. Never gifted to you because you were loyal, patient, or deserving. Power is assumed. It is claimed. It is taken by the man who decides in the absolute silence of his own mind that he is no longer available to live beneath his own potential. And that decision, that cold, quiet, unannounced internal declaration, is where every transformation of consequence in human history has actually begun. Not in the boardroom, not on the stage, in the private darkness of a man's own thinking. Here is what the powerful understand that the powerless never want to accept. The world is not a meritocracy. Let that land. The world does not automatically reward the most talented, the most hardworking, the most morally deserving man in the room. It rewards the man who has mastered the art of positioning. It rewards the man who understands that reality is to a significant degree a negotiation. And in that negotiation, the man who walks in having already decided his own value, who does not flinch when challenged, who does not collapse when ignored, who does not shrink when the room pushes back, that man consistently walks away with more than the man who simply hoped his effort would speak for itself. Effort remains invisible until it is framed by identity. And identity is something you either build deliberately or allow the world to build for you by default. Machiavelli wrote that it is better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both. For centuries, people have argued over that line while completely missing what it truly meant. I was not speaking about cruelty. He was speaking about certainty. A man who is certain, who is difficult to read, who cannot be easily predicted or emotionally manipulated, creates a kind of psychological distance that others instinctively respect, and yes, fear. Not fear in the sense of terror, fear in the sense of weight. The kind of presence that makes people choose their words more carefully around you. The kind of stillness that causes an entire room to recalibrate the moment you step inside. That is not dominance through aggression. It is dominance through self-mastery. And here is the part that separates the men who watch this feel inspired and move on from the men who watch this and truly transform. Inspiration without application is just entertainment. You have been entertained enough. What you need now is a standard, a non-negotiable internal standard for how you see yourself, how you carry yourself, and what you are willing to accept from the world around you. The man without a standard is a man who can be moved by any wind that blows. The man with an unshakable internal standard becomes the wind itself. Everything around him adjusts. Everything around him reorganizes, not because he demanded it loudly, but because his certainty left the world no other option. Drop a comment right now and type the words, "I do not chase, I attract. I do not beg, I become."
Bungee senza.
Say it because you are beginning to understand that this is not philosophy. This is the operating system of every man who has ever built something that could not be ignored. Number 5, the art of becoming untouchable. Let me tell you what untouchable actually means, because the word gets misused constantly by people who think it means invincible, immune to pain beyond consequence.
But it worked.
That is not what it means. Untouchable does not mean nothing can reach you. It means nothing can move you without your permission. It means you have built such a fortified, clearly defined, unshakable sense of who you are and what you stand for. That, the chaos of the outside world, the opinions, the betrayals, the setbacks, the noise, all of it crashes against you, like water against stone. It does not penetrate. It does not redirect you. It simply falls away, and you remain exactly where you decided to be, exactly who you decided to become. That is the architecture of the untouchable man. Now understand something critical. The world will test this not once, not twice continuously, because the world and the people in it are always probing for weakness, always searching for the edge where your confidence ends and your insecurity begins.
Tum-tum.
This is not paranoia. This is the honest observation of human nature that Machiavelli built his entire philosophy upon. People consciously and unconsciously push against boundaries to discover whether those boundaries are real or merely decorative. The man who folds under that pressure teaches the world exactly how to handle him. The man who holds his ground, who does not explain himself, who refuses to over-justify his position, who simply remains unmoved, teaches the world something entirely different. He teaches that there are no edges to test, that the boundary stretches as far as the eye can see, and people by nature do not continue pushing against something that shows no sign of giving way. This is where Machiavellianism and Stoicism merge into something extraordinarily powerful. The Stoics taught that the only territory truly under your control is your own mind, your own judgment, and your own response to whatever life places before you. Machiavelli taught that the man who masters his external position, who understands how power moves and how perception shapes reality, becomes a force that bends circumstances instead of being bent by them. Bring these two philosophies together within a single man, and the result is something the world rarely encounters and never forgets. A man who is internally sovereign and externally strategic. A man who feels everything yet is moved by nothing. A man who sees the game unfolding around him with absolute clarity, chooses every move with cold precision, and acts without hesitation and without apology.
But it.
But here is what no one tells you about becoming untouchable. It requires a level of self-honesty that is genuinely painful, because before you can build the fortress, you have to walk through every room of who you currently are, including the dark rooms, the embarrassing rooms, the rooms where your fears live and your excuses were born, and you have to look at all of it without blinking. The man who cannot face himself honestly will never be able to present himself powerfully. The cracks you refuse to examine internally will always find a way to show themselves externally at the worst possible moment in front of the worst possible audience. Self-awareness is not weakness. It is the foundation upon which every lasting form of power is built. So here is what I am asking you to do. Not tomorrow, not after you feel ready, because that feeling will never come on its own. Right now, begin constructing the version of yourself that you have been postponing. Define with sharp and uncompromising clarity who that man is, how he thinks, how he speaks, what he tolerates, and what he does not, where he is going, and why nothing will stop him from arriving there. Write it down if you have to. Speak it out loud in the silence of a room where no one can hear you, because the declaration matters. The internal commitment matters. It is the first stone laid in the foundation of the untouchable identity you are building. Every empire in history began not with the first brick placed in a wall, but with the unshakable decision in one man's mind that the wall would be built. You are that man. This is that moment. Drop a comment right now and type the words, "I am building something the world is not ready for," because you are, and the world is about to find out. Number 6, silence strategy and the power of being misunderstood. Here is something the powerful have known for centuries that the average man has never been taught and will likely spend his entire life without understanding. Silence is not emptiness. Silence is not weakness. Silence is not the lack of something. Silence is a weapon. It is perhaps the most sophisticated, the most misunderstood, and the most underused weapon in the arsenal of any man who is serious about building and protecting his power. The man who has mastered silence has mastered something that most human beings are fundamentally incapable of. Because silence demands the one quality that modern society has spent decades systematically stripping away from men: patience, stillness, and the ability to remain inside discomfort without instantly reaching for relief through explanation, justification, or the desperate need to be understood by people who are never qualified to understand you in the first place. Let me speak plainly.
Gentleman.
You have been over-explaining yourself your entire life. You have been justifying your decisions to people who held no authority over your destiny. You have been sharing your vision with individuals whose only qualification was proximity rather than wisdom. And every time you opened your mouth to defend who you are or where you are going before someone who never asked in good faith, you surrendered power.
Hanan.
You handed someone a map to your insecurities. You gave them the exact coordinates of your self-doubt and dressed it up as honesty. Real honesty does not require an audience. Real confidence does not require validation. And real power does not require explanation. The lion does not walk through the jungle announcing his intentions to the other animals. He moves, he acts, and the results speak in a language that requires no translation. Machiavelli was ruthlessly clear on this point. He wrote that men judge more by their eyes than by their hands, because everyone can see, but few can feel. What this means in the language of power psychology is devastatingly simple.
Bandemon, monsieur.
What people see you do matters infinitely more than what you tell them you are going to do. Your words are cheap currency in a world flooded with promises. Your actions, your silence, your stillness, your consistency in the absence of applause, these are the rare currencies that actually hold their value. The man who speaks constantly about his plans is spending power he has not yet earned.
Kennedy.
The man who moves in silence and allows his results to arrive before his reputation. Does that man creates a kind of mystique that no amount of self-promotion can manufacture? And now we must address the part of this that will be the hardest for you to accept. Being misunderstood is not a problem to be solved. It is a price to be paid. Every man who has ever operated at a level above the crowd has been misunderstood by that crowd. They called him arrogant when he was simply certain. They called him cold when he was simply disciplined. They called him antisocial when he was simply selective. They called him lucky when he was simply prepared. The misunderstanding is not a sign that something is wrong with you. It is a sign that you are operating on a frequency that the untrained ear cannot yet receive, and your only obligation in that moment is to remain consistent, to keep building, to keep moving, to refuse with every fiber of your being. The temptation to descend to a level of explanation that was designed to make other people comfortable at the expense of your own momentum.
Yep.
Here is the strategic truth that Machiavellian thinkers have applied in boardrooms, on battlefields, and throughout every arena of human competition across history. Mystery is leverage. The man who is completely known becomes completely predictable, and the man who is completely predictable can be completely managed.
Ina.
But the man who reveals himself with intention, who speaks deliberately instead of impulsively, who allows others to wonder, speculate, and fill the silence with their own imagination, possesses a psychological advantage that no credential, no title, and no amount of money can ever buy outright. You become larger in the minds of other people precisely because you have given them so little to analyze and so much to contemplate.
Ham.
Scarcity creates value. That principle applies to commodities. It applies to information, and it applies with absolute precision to how much of yourself you decide to reveal to a world that has not yet earned full access to who you are and who you are becoming. Drop a comment right now and type the words "My silence is my strategy" and "My results are my voice."
Can
Because from this point forward, you are done explaining yourself to people who were never in a position to understand you anyway. Number 7, the enemy within destroying the version of you that kept you small. Everything we have discussed up to this point, the identity shift, the psychology of self-perception, the cold truth about power, the art of becoming untouchable, the weapon of silence, all of it means absolutely nothing. If you refuse to confront the most dangerous adversary
tip
you will ever face in your entire life, this enemy does not live outside of you. He does not exist in the people who doubted you, the systems that overlooked you, or the circumstances that were stacked against you. He lives inside you. He has always lived inside you, and he is extraordinarily sophisticated because he does not attack you with aggression.
Kadammen hơn mùa xàm.
He does not come at you loudly or obviously. He comes at you quietly, reasonably, and often in a voice that sounds frighteningly similar to your own. He is the version of you that kept you small, the version that convinced you to wait, the version that dressed fear up as wisdom and called hesitation careful thinking. The version that whispered you are not ready every single time you stood at the edge of something that could have changed your life. This internal enemy is the product of every limitation ever placed on you that you eventually stopped fighting and started believing. It is the accumulated weight of every time someone told you no, and you accepted that no as a final verdict rather than a temporary obstacle. It is the psychological residue of every failure you experienced, and then used as evidence to build a case against your own potential. And here is what makes this enemy so devastatingly effective. He does not need to defeat you in a single battle. He simply needs to delay you long enough that the delay itself becomes your defeat.
Come all way.
I need you to wait one more day, one more month, one more year until the accumulated weight of waiting has quietly crushed the ambition out of you so completely that you forget it was ever there to begin with. Machiavelli understood that the most catastrophic losses in the arena of power are not the ones inflicted by external enemies. They are the battles that begin when a man becomes his own opposition, when his internal resistance outweighs his external drive, when the voice inside that whispers, "Who are you to want this?" speaks louder than the voice declaring, "I was built for exactly this." The prince who cannot govern himself cannot govern anything else. The man who has failed to conquer the territories within his own mind will always be conquered by the territories outside of it. This is not a metaphor. It is the most practical and applicable truth in the entire philosophy of power. So what does it truly take to destroy the version of yourself that kept you small? It requires a decision made not through emotion, but with cold, surgical, and irreversible finality. It demands the same ruthlessness that Machiavelli prescribed for dealing with external threats, because the internal threat deserves nothing less. You do not negotiate with the part of yourself that has been sabotaging your greatness. You do not compromise with it. You do not attempt to slowly remove it from your psychology through gentle affirmations and morning routines alone.
Bad King Shui.
You identify it with unflinching clarity. You name exactly what it has cost you. You hold it accountable for every opportunity you did not take, every room you did not command, every version of yourself you did not become, and then you make the decision permanent and non-negotiable that it no longer has a seat at the table of your mind. You are not that man anymore. You are not the man who shrinks. You are not the man who waits. You are not the man who lets the noise of his own doubt drown out the signal of his own potential. That man is done. That chapter is closed. And what rises in his place is something the world around you is going to have to learn to reckon with entirely. Drop a comment right now and type the words, "I have outgrown the version of me that was afraid," because that statement is not just words. It is a burial, and it is long overdue. Number 8, the Machiavellian standard, how the powerful truly live. Now we arrive at something that most self-improvement content will never take you to, because most self-improvement content is designed to make you feel better, not to make you more effective.
ครับก่อน
And there is a profound and consequential difference between those two things. Feeling better is temporary. Being more effective is structural. Feeling better requires external stimulation, a motivational video, an inspiring quote, a moment of emotional elevation that fades by Tuesday morning. Being more effective requires something far less comfortable and far more permanent. It requires the adoption of a standard, not a goal, not a vision board, not an affirmation, a standard. And understanding the difference between a goal and a standard is one of the most important cognitive shifts you will ever make in your pursuit of genuine, lasting, unshakable power. A goal is something you reach for. A standard is something you refuse to fall below.
กินนะ
A goal exists in the future, which means it is always at a distance, always slightly out of reach, always dependent on circumstances aligning in your favor. A standard exists right now in this moment in every decision you make, every boundary you enforce, every situation you choose to engage with or walk away from. The powerful man does not wake up every morning chasing a goal.
ครับคุณ
He wakes up every morning committed to a standard, and that standard directs everything. How he uses his time, who he permits into his inner circle, which conversations he chooses to engage in, what kind of energy he allows into his environment, what he is willing to accept from others, and more importantly, what he is willing to accept from himself.
บ้านมอนซีสไลซ์สวอสเซ
Sword. That standard becomes the architecture of his entire life, and it is non-negotiable in a way that goals can never be. Machiavelli observed that the greatest leaders throughout history were not the most gifted men of their generation. They were the men who demanded the highest standards from themselves and then built environments, alliances, and systems that relentlessly reinforced those standards.
ใช่แน่
They understood that talent without discipline is potential that never reaches maturity, that intelligence without direction is energy that slowly dissipates, that ambition without a governing standard is a fire that eventually burns everything, including the man who ignited it. The Machiavellian standard is not about perfection, it is about direction. It is about the absolute refusal to drift, the refusal to let a bad week become a bad month, the refusal to let one compromise open the door to a cascade of compromises that slowly dismantle everything you have built inside yourself. Here is what living by a Machiavellian standard actually looks like in practice, stripped of all romanticism and delivered with the cold clarity this philosophy demands.
ว้าว
It means you are the hardest person in your own life to satisfy. It means you hold yourself to a level of accountability that you would never need to impose on others because you impose it on yourself first and without mercy. It means that mediocrity is not a phase you pass through on the way to greatness.
ครับ
It is an identity you reject so completely that it no longer feels like an option. It means you build your day, your relationships, your decisions, and your environment around the man you are becoming rather than the man you have been. And it means you do this consistently, quietly, without applause, without an audience, and without the need for anyone to acknowledge the weight of what you are carrying or the discipline it takes to carry it with grace.
ครับ
Because here is the final and most powerful truth about the Machiavellian standard. The world will eventually reflect it back to you, not immediately, not on your preferred timeline, but inevitably because the world, despite all its chaos and its apparent randomness, is in fact deeply responsive to the internal standards of the men who move through it with conviction. When you raise your standard, you raise the quality of everything that is able to reach you. You raise the quality of the opportunities that find you, the people who are drawn to you, the results that begin to accumulate around you. The world does not rearrange itself for the man who wishes things were different.
ท่านอาดา
It rearranges itself slowly, and then all at once for the man who has decided at the level of identity, at the level of standard, at the level of non-negotiable internal law, exactly who he is and exactly what he will and will not accept from life. Drop a comment right now and type the words, "My standard is my identity, and my identity is untouchable."
Benderson.
Because that is not a statement about where you are headed. It is a declaration of who you already are. Number 9. The world rearranges itself when everything begins to shift. This is the moment where everything we have built throughout this entire conversation comes together into one undeniable truth. The very truth that the title of this video has been pointing toward since the beginning.
Thất bại.
The truth that Machiavelli understood, that the Stoics understood, and that every man who has ever risen from obscurity to significance eventually discovered not through inspiration, but through lived experience that was often painful. When you truly, fundamentally, and irreversibly transform the way you think about yourself, the world does not merely respond, it rearranges.
Bonker.
Not as a metaphor, not as poetry, structurally. The actual reality of your everyday life begins reorganizing itself around the new frequency you are broadcasting. Opportunities that were always there but remained invisible to your former identity suddenly come into view. The people meant for your next chapter begin to appear, while those who belonged only to your previous chapter naturally begin to fade away. The doors that seemed permanently closed reveal themselves to have simply been waiting for a knock from a man who believed he had the right to enter. Understand what is actually happening when this shift occurs. It is not magic. It is not the universe conspiring romantically on your behalf. It is something far more precise and far more powerful than that.
Bounce.
It is the mechanical, inevitable consequence of a man operating from a new and higher internal reference point. When your self-perception changes, your behavior changes. When your behavior changes, your decisions change. When your decisions change, your actions change. And when your actions change with enough consistency, enough conviction, and enough cold strategic intention behind them, your results change.
Tentensat.
And changed results, compounded over time, produce a changed reality. This is not mysticism. This is the physics of personal power applied with Machiavellian precision. But here is what you must understand about this rearrangement. It will not always feel like reward in the early stages. Sometimes it will feel like loss. People will exit your life who cannot match your new standard. Situations you once tolerated will become unbearable because your identity has outgrown them. Comfort zones that once felt safe will begin to feel like suffocation because the man you are becoming cannot breathe in the spaces the old you was content to inhabit.
싸워서.
Do not mistake this discomfort for failure. It is not failure. It is friction. It is the necessary resistance that accompanies every genuine transformation of consequence. The snake does not mourn the skin it sheds. It moves forward new and unburdened into territory it could not have accessed before.
Benset.
You are in that process right now. The shedding is not the end. It is the beginning of the version of you that the world is about to meet for the very first time. Number 10. The final decree. Become what the world cannot ignore. This is where it ends, and this is where you begin. Everything you have heard across these 9 parts was not philosophy for the sake of philosophy. It was not intellectual exercise or motivational decoration. It was a dismantling, a deliberate surgical dismantling of every false belief, every borrowed limitation, every comfortable lie that has been standing between you and the version of yourself that was always meant to exist. You came into this video as one man. If you were truly listening, if you allowed every word to settle exactly where it was meant to, you are leaving as someone different, someone sharper, someone quieter, someone the world will have to confront on entirely new terms. Machiavelli did not write for the masses. He wrote for the man who was ready.
Cut.
The man who could accept the cold truth delivered without sentiment, without softening, and without the comforting cushion of false reassurance. That man is you. It has always been you. The only thing that ever stood between you and your own power was the way you chose to think about yourself. And now that choice has changed. Your thinking has changed. And as we have established with cold and unwavering certainty, when your thinking changes, the world rearranges itself accordingly. So go now. Move in silence. Build without announcing your plans. Rise without asking permission. And become so undeniably, so completely, so powerfully yourself that the world has no choice but to make room for you. Drop a comment right now and type the words, "I think differently now." The world will notice it, because it will. If this video awakened something real inside you, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss what comes next. The next lesson is already waiting for you, and so is the next version of yourself.